All right, so hit record. And I'm with Emma Jane Heaton. Emma, talk to me about where you are in your author journey.
Hello. I'm with this particular novel. I'm trying to get it. Well, the aim is to get it traditionally published.
Nice.
Um, but I'm also working on some like a trilogy at the moment that I want to try self-publishing. I want to
Okay.
try and see if I can go both routes. Um, yeah. So this one, I actually started it a couple of years ago, did the first draft, and then was too busy to do anything with it for a very long time, and then came back to it and did a bit more and
Nice.
it again. And yeah. I really want to try and get an agent if I can.
Okay. Very cool. Is this your first the trilogy in this book, are they the first books you finished, or have you finished more before?
I have, yeah. I've written two before this. The first one was like always just going to be me trying to figure out how to write a novel.
Yeah,
Just
we all have
like,
at least one of those, yeah.
yeah,
Uh,
it's
some of
really
us have
hard
like
not
four or
to.
five of them. Yeah.
And then the second one was it was definitely an improvement, but it was like it was a children's one, which honestly I
Okay.
don't have. This is the only children's book idea I've ever had. I don't really want to be a children's author, so
Okay.
it's like yeah, I decided to kind of just leave that and yeah,
Gotcha.
on to this one.
Very nice. All right. Okay. So I'm gonna bring the piece up and we can talk about it. It's really strong. Sorry, I have to figure out how to show it to you so we can both see it. There we go. You had asked me about POV. So you've got two characters going, two POVs going, Rebecca and Natalie. Is that how you're saying it?
Yeah.
Okay. And they're in two different time periods. And the time periods at some point are going to converge. Well, not converge, but they're going to figure out that they're linked as people.
Mhm.
Um, what do you have a genre for it? Is this romance? Is it where you kind of, is it just lit fiction? Like where are you kind of classifying it?
So it's kind of I was going to ask you about this actually.
Okay.
So so it's kind of got horror elements, it's kind of got dark fantasy, it's got sort of a ghost story.
Okay.
Um yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay. Is there going to be a relationship between Natalie and Harry?
There will be, yeah, but
Yeah.
that's not kind of like it's not a romance. There will be a romance in it. It's definitely not like primarily a romance.
Okay. So you haven't really landed on the genre yet.
I think you know what I was kind of going for horror, but like then, but I don't know if I've, especially with the start, because I
It
don't
doesn't
feel
start like
like
a horror.
no, it doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't.
I was just like trying to like, yeah, I don't know,
Yeah. And
get
we
the
can
characters as they are.
Yeah, we can, and you do. So you've done a really good job of separating the two POVs. They're well,
Cool.
like I'm
Yeah.
not going to be confused as to who I'm reading when. I want to talk about some things that you're doing with them. Uh, if you're going for an agent, you're going to have to nail down the genre question.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Because different agents deal, like not all the time, but a lot of times different agents deal with different genres. So you'll have to pick which one you are.
Mhm.
Um, and you want to find an agent that works with stuff like you've done before, like you want to do. So like, if you find an agent that's doing a lot of like slasher horror where it's like, Freddy Krueger is going to come in for your nightmares and stab you. If that's what you want to write, you need to query. You'll be more likely to get a slasher book through that agent. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Whereas, like, if you're writing like a historical romance, that agent's probably not the one you want to query. So
Yeah.
we need to we need to nail down. Uh used to be the advice was like nail down one genre, but since I'm looking over at it because I have it over there on my desk. Since John Trudy's The Anatomies of Genre came out, people are now kind of saying like pick two or three and be like, I'm hitting the obligatory scenes of all three of these. Um, it doesn't start like a horror. A horror would need a darker and more fast-paced
Mhm.
start. It honestly starts like a romance.
Okay.
Um, it does,
Okay.
or a cozy. Like it starts like a cozy. Now, in the second chapter, you've got some cussing, which is different than a cozy. So it really does start like a mystery or a cozy. So,
Mhm.
you know, if you tie the element of, if one of them is trying to uncover a mystery or explore some kind of mystery, you could run it as like, I would say like maybe a dark mystery, um, or like a mystery horror. It would work that way. I wouldn't drift into thriller because again the opening is a little is in a very good way. I mean this word in a very good way. The opening's more quaint than a thriller. Like in a thriller, you want somebody like, running away from the cops at the start of the the start of the book. So it's a,
Yeah.
meeting friends, hanging out in a pub is more like romance, cozy mystery, historical fiction type thriller. Not type thriller, type genre. Um so yeah, so is this the start of the book?
It is, yeah.
Okay.
I guess so. That probably helps me actually because I didn't know who to start with as well.
Mm,
Um, and I think I basically put this bit in because I just really liked the start of Rebecca's bit. I just really
okay.
liked it. Like I've done a good job here.
What do you
Um,
like about it? Let's talk about that first. What do you like about it? It's very well written. Let me say
okay,
that.
thank you.
But what do you like about it?
Um, I think so. I wrote her POV. Originally, I actually wrote Harry's POV as the past one.
Okay.
I wrote this one kind of the end of last year. So I already knew her really, really well. I
Okay.
knew like the story really well. So it just kind of came out and this was close to a first draft.
Okay.
Um it just kind of came out really naturally. So I just kind of like didn't need to add too much to it. I kind of had the elements there. Um
What
I don't
year is this happening in?
This is wait, what are we on? 1999.
1999. Okay. Um, that's perfect. Uh, so you open with her looking through this diary and remembering her grandmother and then having this like moment of sadness. And then she gets a phone call and she goes to the pub. I I agree. It's well written. It comes out good. It's a very reflective opening.
Hmm.
Um, the reflective openings aren't necessarily bad, but it just depends what genre you're looking for. They do bend literary fiction, right? Like a reflective opening like this bends toward that like drama of, you know, well, because the first thing the reader reads is like sets up for like this is the emotional journey we're going to be on together. And so
Yeah.
when you have this kind of reflective opening, the reader's going to read it and be like, "Oh, okay, so we're going to like take a slow bent through Grandma's diary." Right? Like that's the kind of so it leads to that. And she's sad at the end. So it's just like, "Oh, we're going to experience these, deep emotions." Some readers are going to be like, "I'm all in for that." But if it's a horror, you give me this like slow reflective opening. When you start murdering people, it's gonna be like, oh wait, what happened to my slow walk with grandma through her diary, right? Like so, um,
Yeah.
it's it's again, it's really well written, but it is not a like grab me type opening. Um,
Mm.
so if you're gonna start with this now, it goes from that to your conversation in the pub. Your conversation in the pub is fantastic. It's very engaging. I'm meeting a group of friends. I want to be with these people. I want to get to know these people more. And you're showing me that like, hey, Rebecca has this like group around her, right? I would probably start with your conversation in the pub and then end this section with grandma.
Okay.
Um, because you don't want to lose grandma. It's well written. It has some good emotional tone to it. There's a little bit more I want
Yeah.
to do with it. Um, specifically around the build to the sorrow, but I think your most engaging moments are start here when the rain stings my cheeks as I pull my beanie already over the wind, already wind whipped hair, and hug my coat tight around me uh, as I pace up the road. Like this right here was like, here's the start for me
Okay.
of the real like dive in. Right, is chattering with a stranger at the bar, and then you've got this great bit with Harry. Again, it is a meet cute in some ways, so we do get this like, okay, we're going to in this meet cute, we're going to meet Harry and Rebecca. So you do kind of feel like this might be a romance opening. Which you can have elements of romance. It doesn't have to be a romance novel. Does that make sense? But
Hmm.
yeah, so but I'm only saying that because I'm thinking about what your start communicates about genre expectations. Um, how does that feel starting with a conversation?
Yeah, yeah, I could give that a go. I think so. So what I was trying to pull off in the start is sort of setting up that she's kind of grieving. Um, she's trying to move on from this place,
Okay,
but she's still quite connected to it. And also just this like speculative element when she reads that little bit in her grand's diary.
gotcha.
Um,
And again, there's no right or like, and I'm going to tell you this through the whole piece because your problem is like the problems of the piece are not your writing. Your writing's really good, right? So you're as an author, you're making choices, and we're all making choices, right? Like that's what creating a story is. So your writing's really solid. You're making some choices as you go, and I want you to be strategic about those choices. There is no right or wrong choice, right?
mhm.
There isn't a like, hey, there's no manual I can pull off my shelf and point to and be like, here's how this is supposed to start, right? There's just We're just crafting an emotional journey for the reader.
Yeah.
And I just want you to be like, I want you to make active choices about what the journey is you're crafting.
Okay.
So if you're starting like speculative and reflective, it, you know, that's a fantastic way to open as long as that's the choice you're making, right? Like as long as you're like, yeah, this is what I want the reader to feel when they come into the book initially. Um, there's also nothing wrong with writing through it and discovering kind of where it fits as you write. Does that make sense in the genre world? Like, okay, I'm going to write
Yeah.
this and I'm going to figure out where it fits as I write. And genres with with AI coming for all of us, with the current like Chat GPT empowering authors to crank out a genre novel a month, a genre novel a day, a month, a day. Um, Pushing away from genre may not be a bad thing right now. Like there's a weird we're in a weird time. So I don't know that there's any specific answers for like how to do this. So then when we remove the rules,
Hmm.
it's about what do you want the reader journey to be? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you're opening, so let's go with the speculative kind of reflective reader journey. Excuse me one second, I need to cough.
Yeah. There
And
was
I don't want to cough into your microphone. Well,
um
nobody wanted to hear me cough into the microphone. Yeah, so starting with that like speculative start, before we go there, how do you feel about that take on your
um, I do find it kind of amusing that you're saying it's like almost literary because I didn't think that's what I was I didn't think I was kind of capable of writing lit fic. I don't read it at all. Like I actively avoid it.
that's really funny.
Um,
What do you usually read?
I read fantasy, horror, and sci-fi.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, and various. Yeah.
Look, I want you to take your top four books that you own,
Okay.
and I
Yeah.
want you to read the first four paragraphs. And I
Okay.
don't want you to read for content. I don't care about their content. I want you to read for how it makes you feel as a
Okay.
reader. I want you to read them and be like, what does this do to me? What's the emotional core that this author is trying to start me off at? Are they starting in action scenes? Are they starting in, are we seeing a giant spaceship fly across the stage of my imagination, like
Mm-hmm.
trying to instill a sense of awe and wonder? What's the emotional pull that the writer is going for here? And
Mm-hmm.
that'll kind of give you, much better than I can, that'll give you a feeling for what you want your emotional opening to be.
Okay. I think I have a bit of a problem with I consume all of the podcasts and all of the what do you call it, like the books on
Yeah,
writing, all of the craft books,
nice.
everything. And I think I've
Yeah,
maybe take on too much advice sometimes.
it's very
And
possible.
try and put it all in place, which maybe isn't the right thing. Because
Yeah.
like what I've been trying to do with my opening as it is. Oh, oh, sorry.
No, you're totally good.
Turn that off. Yeah, what I was trying to do was I guess kind of just set them up in their world as it is. But I always kind of felt a little bit like I'm not sure if this is the right way because I had this have keep coming to this idea of starting with Natalie when she first arrives in the village instead of
Okay.
doing a kind of build up to it.
Interesting.
And then sort of telling little bits of the backstory as we go.
Yeah, I mean,
And that might be better.
I think Natalie's opening's great. I think Rebecca's opening's
Okay.
great. I think they're both good. I just, the only reason and I don't want to make you self-conscious. The only reason I'm asking about why this opening is because it does set the emotional tone you're running
Yeah.
for in the book. And
Mhm.
so, um, yeah, again, Emma Jane, it's about what you want the experience you want your reader to have. I feel you in the like I also do that. I listen to all the podcasts, I read all the books, I obsess over everything, and then I like try to I with every book I'll have this moment where I'm like, I'm going to apply all of the advice at one time. There does come a part where you have to turn people like me off and you
Yeah.
have to just write your book. Yeah. Which is a weird thing for me to say, but it's true. There comes a point where you're like, okay, I know I have gained as much knowledge as I can. Now I just have to like see what comes out of me. Uh,
Yeah.
and you'll be surprised, right? Like I don't read necessarily really dark thrillers, but when I wrote my first books, that's the emotional place I was in. So that's what came out of me, right? Like, and
Mhm.
there is, the books we write are in a lot of ways a specifically emotionally um a representation of where we are, especially in your first books. Like, look, when you get up to like book 50 and you're just cranking them out, that's not true anymore. Then you're just it's you know um then you're just doing a job, right? Like but for the like when you're in your first books, it's hard not to let your own emotional state bleed into them. So
Mhm.
it'll come out how you are sometimes, like how you are emotionally, which is a beautiful thing. It's a really good thing. So, but what I'm saying is,
Unless you're
feel
trying to write horror.
unless you're trying to write horror and you're in a very reflective and somber moment, you're gonna very reflective horror, which isn't, those exist. It's not a bad thing. There's some really great reflective horrors, but I think there would be more like psychological horrors. There's not going to be any monsters jumping out around the corner. There's going to be a lot of like, you know, um, they're probably called psychological thrillers. Yeah, I don't know. The genre is so confusing. Uh, anyway, we could talk about that forever. But you let yourself bleed on the page. You gotta
Mhm.
at some point you gotta turn people like me off and trust your gut and be like,
Okay.
this is what I'm gonna write.
Okay.
I will say with this paragraph with grandma, I need you to ground me in location a little bit more. Not necessarily the first sentence is
Mhm.
great, not necessarily in the first sentence, but somewhere in here,
Okay.
I just need you to give me a note that
Yeah.
you are in her apartment and that her apartment's going away. I don't really get that understanding of where
Mhm.
you are until you get into the conversation down here about finding a tenant for grandma's house. So, because if you keep this as an opening, just give me a line in this paragraph somewhere about what is causing it's the loss of this apartment, like somebody else taking this apartment that's causing the sadness. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it does.
And that'll ground this for me. Like this line is great. My own sadness is different. It's in my belly and my jaw clenched to tightness across my forehead because it's tied up with regret and guilt and the need to do something. It's a great, really nice line, right? But if you ground me in like with a line of like, um maybe here at the end of this paragraph, something that's like, I don't remember the words, only that Gran was so sad deep in her bones. Sad, I guess I must have sensed it. Looking around her apartment, I can't believe that she won't walk this room again. My own
Hmm.
sadness is different, right? Like, but just a little line like that grounds me into location. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an interesting, when you're starting this piece with a feeling. That's
Hmm.
part of, there's four different ways to start a piece. You can start a piece with a who, with, like who Hemingway starts The Sun Also Rises talking about Robert. And he gives us like a bio of Robert at the start of that. That's starting with a who. It grounds us in a person. You can start the piece describing scenery, which is I think what most of the time authors do. It's the most common, where it's like, the forest was lush and green and the wind blew through the trees, right? Like it starts us in a place, which grounds us in kind of like, here's the world we're in. You can start with dialogue, where it's like somebody speaks into the darkness. To really do that well, you usually want like two or three vocalizations to nail that down. But you're starting with a feeling, which is very much how, speaking of horror, is very much how Toni Morrison starts Beloved, a literary horror ghost story. Um, she starts it with spite. She's like the sense of spite. You're starting with the kind of the feeling of loss. Um, as you know, if you do, when you lean into your own writing, your own gut, if you find that this is bending more literary, you're going to want to bring this sense of loss back a lot, because literary is about themes, and you're starting off with a theme and a feeling of loss. So you're going to want to bring that feeling back a lot through the book. Um,
Yeah, I do. Yeah, yeah, keep bringing back how she feels about her grand's death. That does keep coming back again and again.
yeah,
It
so
kind of becomes more, yeah.
that would be a great theme. Um, Playing with it, having her, to bend more literary, you really want to dig into that, like playing with that theme, how that theme is impacting her choices, the other characters, that kind of stuff. Um, yeah. Okay, before we move into the pub conversation, any other questions? Anything else you want to talk about with this opening?
I don't think so.
Okay. When we get into the pub, um, I want you to give me, I loved this line here, the rain stings my cheeks. This was really nice. Um, and we've talked about the emotional pull. I left you this note. Let's talk about the emotional pull and where you want me to go. We've talked about that. Like that's what I
Mhm.
mean when I'm like, hey, what do you start? Where are you starting?
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. Um, yeah. So here I tell you to show me. You have this line. The diary hangs limply in my hand as I tell Pete I'll be 5 minutes. I pull the blue ribbon marker into place. Anytime you're doing a like summary of vocalization like that, I want you just to show me the vocalization because I want to hear her voice.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Um,
Yeah, yeah, that makes
yeah.
sense.
Again, it's a choice. It's not a right or wrong. That is Emma Jane. That is 100% my preference as an editor. So
Mhm.
I have preferences. I have things that like, oh yeah, this is what I want to see. Again, you got to decide if that's right for your style and your writing. But I feel like that giving me that vocalization again grounds me in the moment. It makes me part of this moment. Um, but yeah.
And I think you're right because I mean we've only just started, so we might as well hear her voice and
Mhm.
get to know her a bit more.
Yeah, let's hear her talk. Let's hear that three exchange conversation with Pete, right? Like, because you've got it up here. Hey, all right, Left Pete replies, you'll be able to get the club, might have a new tenant. Then this is nice. My heart drops, not the sensation I was expecting. Like, this is a nice reflection on how she's feeling about what he said. Very well done. But I still feel her here now, and I'm not sure what to live with it. Right? The diary hangs limply in my hand. As I say, I'll just be 5 minutes. Right? Like
Mhm.
just finish off that little string of dialogue there with a vocalization, and then I pull the. But again, I'm just being nitpicky, and it's part. I clearly like dialogue, so that's part of my like preference. Lean into your gut. Um, I want Harry to talk here. So you know, Becca, come meet Harry. He says the stranger Harry snapped. This is a great description, which is why I wanted to read it. The stranger Harry smiles sharp and confident. Even from across the room, I see little sparks of gold in his eyes. See, this is what I'm talking about. That your opening pub scene is so strong.
Okay.
It's so great. Um, a little spark fizzles in my chest in response, which I quickly dispel. I've spent too much time in this small place. I can't even remember the last time I went on a date. I love what you're doing. You give me the description of him, and then you use that description to tell me how she's feeling, which is, Emma Jane, that is such a hard thing to do well, and you're doing it really well. Then his gaze grates down. Then his gaze grates down and up my body, and I instantly dislike him. What a great line. Arrogant prick was your next line. I want to hear him talk here, right? Like I want him to say something and then let this be the reflection on what he says.
Okay.
Um, just because, you know, and he doesn't have to say much. He can just kind of, he doesn't even have to vocalize. He can just look up at her and nod, but give him some kind of nonverbal communication that's intentionally directed at her that mirrors his gaze. Because he
Hmm.
looks her up and down, but that's one of those actions that like we don't necessarily know is being perceived. Does that make sense? So I want
Mm.
to give him just a touch of agency here. He could even just be like, hey, or I was imagining like a hey babe, something like that. But so it all part of that also depends on like, is this first impression something she's going to overcome and grow to like him, or is this first impression true to who he is?
Um, Sorry, I don't know why my printer's. Can you hear that? My printer's
No,
just
I can't
stopped
hear that.
making
It's really
noises in the
funny.
background. Okay. Um,
Speaking of ghost stories.
I might have to
Yeah.
turn it off. That's really annoying. Anyway, so she's
So
yeah, so
Is this who Harry is, or is this a wrong
this
first
is
impression?
like the front that Harry puts on.
Okay.
So she's gonna kind of, yeah, see other sides to him, and eventually like him.
Okay.
But
So yeah, I would let him vocalize here, say something to her or nod at her or do something that like indicates he sees her, and then have her follow it with arrogant prick. Give them like a touch of interaction here. Um,
yeah.
Beyond his like unconscious gazing up and looking her up and down. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, but this whole scene is really great. Um, yeah, and everybody getting greeted at the bar, it really helps me know Rebecca really well. Like I feel like by the time I get to the end of this scene, um, I'm really deep into her POV and enjoy the person that I'm with on this journey. Does that make sense? Like you've set up a
Mhm.
really good vehicle. I really enjoy her in and out with her friends. And then the conversation here with Harry is great. Like I had no notes for you. This is a really good. They're back and forth about looking somewhere to rent. Her tentativeness is very clear. You've got good, again, you're giving me like really good emotional notes. Like here, after a moment, he nods, that smile never fading. My aunt and I are looking for accommodation for the foreseeable future. We can pay cash. Cool, I say, my gut clenching again at the thought of letting strangers stay in Grant's house, sleep in Grant's bed. But I take a breath and step back. This is how I start. This is how I start my life. The money will help me pick up where I left off. So, really good world building there, like in the middle of a conversation. You're slowing the conversation down in the right ways, and that, like, you're giving me his setup before he speaks. You're letting him vocalize, and then her vocalize follows immediately after it before you give me her reflection. So, it sounds like they're talking to each other, which is great. If you had given me this cool at the end of here, it would have felt like, oh man, she's reflecting a long time before she answers. So I like that you're like putting the vocalizations next to each other like that. It's a really good, it adds to the idea that like they're in a bar and they're talking to each other. But then here you flip it, which also makes it feel real, right? He holds out his hand to shake. A thick silvery ring glints duly on his middle finger. Harry, he says. Becky, right? I expect him to give me one of those firm squeeze type handshakes, so I squeeze first. Rebecca, I'd say just firmly. This is a nice, like putting the physicality here before she speaks is really nice because it interprets how we hear her voice, right? Like so you're doing a really great job with your dialogue. It's a solid, really
Yay, good
solid
to know.
play. Yeah.
I'm always very worried about it, actually. So that's really good to hear.
No, you're doing good. And that's part of the reason this introduction between the two of them is so strong. A, you made me immediately think romance because the introduction
Okay.
between the two of them is so strong.
Mhm.
And B, I was like, this should be first. This is like this scene, her meeting him, all that kind of stuff. Like, again, there's no right answer. And if you want to start off with that emotional pull of loss, this shouldn't be first. But if you're looking to jump into a more active scene at the start of your book, this I would have her leave the pub, then go to Gren's house and have the reflection with the diary. Um, because the
Okay.
reflection's good, it's just setting a specific emotional tone.
Mhm.
Okay, before we move on to Natalie, any questions about anything else you want to cover with Rebecca's opening?
Um, no, I don't think so. I think just other like, I guess the only thing was that I was in this passage, I'm trying to set up what it's like the village is like the village is kind of like so that's the setting for the majority of the story. And in Natalie's world, it's like it's isolated and cold, and
Mm-hmm.
there's not many people living in it anymore. It's very like, yeah, there's like devoid of life.
Interesting.
Um,
That's fun. I love that you're doing that. That's very cool. Because this feels very warm, small
yeah,
town, cozy, like we're all friends, everybody knows everybody, we're all tight.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I was wondering, like, maybe should I be setting up if I want it to be a sort of more of a darker tone, should I be setting up the present day first and then coming back to how it was before
That would
and then
do
sort
it.
of figure out how we get there?
That would do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you wanted to start open darker, that would do it. You know, again, go look at those books you love and ask what the emotional tone is they're opening with. And you know, feel free to think back on this conversation and be like, Jeff is completely wrong. So feel free to read those and be like, no, they do start reflective. Jeff doesn't know what he's talking about, right? Like, so I will fully 100% own that. Um, again, it's just about being intentional. There's not a right or a wrong. It's about being intentional with what you want.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, there's one other thing I would like you to do here, which is in these conversations, have her over here or have somebody say something about a thing happening that we would all know. Because you need to set the time period. Because you're going to
Okay.
time jump, we need to know that it's 1999. It
Yeah.
doesn't need to necessarily happen in this scene, but it needs to happen before we jump POV. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Okay.
Before we jump to Natalie's POV, you got to set for me that this is in 1999.
Mhm.
So, I'm not sure what news events were happening in 1999. I think that was the Clinton era in the United States, but give us something in the UK that like everybody in the UK would know marks this around 1999.
Cool.
Um, the Nokia 3210 is a nice start to that, but
Mhm.
that kind of grounds me in like a 7-year period, not necessarily
Yeah.
yeah. And it could just be, I read that and I was like, huh, that's old, but we're also kind of in a cozy, like rural place. So it could just be that she has a super old cell phone, right? Like, so
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
And it's not like you're grounding me in like the 1800s where like you're like the lamb ran across the street and I'm like, okay, I had to take up my bustle and girdle to like walk through the mud puddle. I'm like, that's the time period is close enough. um I mean, you know I'm gonna date myself. Had already graduated from high school in 1999, but the time period is close enough that so it feels close enough to me. The time period is close enough that I think you need to do something a little more to ground us in where we are.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
That makes sense.
Okay. First question I have for you from Natalie. I'm gonna restate what I said. There are no
Mhm.
right or wrong answers.
Okay.
You jump from first person to third person POV.
Yes.
Is it intentional?
Yeah, so that was I wrote Natalie's first third person. Um and that's how I wrote Harry's when I originally wrote the whole
Okay.
thing. And because I wanted to then do Rebecca's who will turn out to basically be the same person as Natalie, I wanted to give like an extra bit of distance. So, one
Okay.
person in third and one in first. That was my thinking with that.
Okay.
Um, yeah,
It
and also the fact that Natalie in the present day is in the third, so we're kind of a step further back from her, is because like when it comes together in the end, it's going to be in first person again because that's her kind of realizing who she is and stepping
okay.
into
All
that
right.
that was my thought process.
I like that you're making active choices, and I'm not going to comment on it.
Okay.
It is an unusual choice. Usually, if you're going to do first person, you do all first person, or third person, you do all
Mm,
third person. Um, your first, I typically do not like first person, but your first person's really
okay.
well written. So I liked Rebecca a lot. It did create distance between me and Natalie. So you are
Yeah.
accomplishing that. I read it and I was like,
Okay.
oh, because you're so good at giving us these lines that tell us how she feels about things. By the bar, Harry's halfway through his second whiskey. I approach. He looks at me with those eyes again. I don't like how he holds himself. Leaning up, like this is such a great in her head descriptor.
Hmm.
It you're doing it's a part of well, part of your problem is that you're doing first person very well. So it pushes
Okay.
you are creating
Right.
that distance. I'm
Yeah.
hearing you say it's intentional, so I'm not going to tell you to change it, um, because it is an active choice you're making. But it is just be ready as you give this book to more authors,
Hmm.
because we pick on things like that. Readers
Yeah.
will care less, authors will care because it's something we can like. Whenever you give a book to an author, we're looking to tell you what we see that's wrong with it. So
Mhm.
if this is something we can ground ourselves in, just be ready to explain this 1,000 times. That no, I did this on purpose. So
Okay.
yeah, I
Do
just
you
want
think
you to be
it's
prepared.
like, does it make Natalie's POV like too much distance, the contrast, or
No, no, your
is it
dialogue's good.
okay?
It's just
Okay.
something I was like, huh, I hope that was on purpose. Like,
Hmm.
does that make sense? And
Yeah.
I hear you say it is on purpose. You know, if this book becomes like 80,000 words, creating that distance from Natalie for 40,000 words may have a bigger impact than a short story. Because right now I'm reading it as a short story, so it is a big, it is a leap as an author, right? Like we make these leaps. We're like, I'm going to try this thing
Hmm.
and I'm going to see how it works. This is a big leap. Uh,
Okay.
yeah. Or another way to think about it is, readers come to the book with expectations. One of the expectations they have is like, if this is first person POV, it's always first person POV. If it's third
Mhm.
person POV, it's always third person POV. You are defying that expectation. Sometimes we
Yeah.
defy those expectations and it comes out really beautiful.
I'm sure
Sometimes,
I'm sure I've read some books where they do things like this. I can't
oh yeah,
think of
oh, I
the top of my head
promise you
now.
have. I promise
I
you
bet
have.
they're literary fiction. I bet.
Yeah. No, I promise you have. This has been done before. I can't name one off the top of my head, but I know it has. But it is one of those, like, you have to earn the reader's trust to be like, hey, I'm this is on purpose. Come along with me.
Hmm.
We're doing this for a reason. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I love the change in language here for Natalie. There's definitely a more modern feel to her POV, which is great. It's very, I know you were nervous about, you sent in your email that you were nervous about how the change in POV feels. Her world feels very different. And part of it is the way you change her language, right? Like, so, this opening line, balloons filled the room, the smell of burnt cake and anger wrapped indiscriminately around them all. Natalie's mom had been arguing again. She couldn't even fuck up her life quietly. Her thick, toxic guilt billowed out no matter how hard she tried to hold it in. Again, you've got some scenery here, but you're starting again with a very strong emotional pull. And
Hmm.
that emotional pull is radically different than Rebecca's. So it's a really
Yeah.
great contrast to the two of them. And the way you're crafting the language is different than how you crafted it with Rebecca, which gives them two very distinct voices, which is really well done. So I just wanted to assure you that, like, what you're nervous about in the email you sent me, you shouldn't be. You're doing a
Okay.
good job. Yeah.
Cool. Good. 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 Thank
Uh,
you.
I do need you to I need a line in here setting
Hmm.
the scene for me about how big this birthday party is and who's there. Because you start dropping in characters and they kind of drop out of nowhere. Happy birthday, said Sue, drying her hands soap on the dishcloth. I don't know who Sue is or where she's coming from.
Okay. I don't know why I changed that. I did have, I don't know why I've changed that. Um, so Nat has two mums,
Okay.
and it was to differentiate them. I was using their actual names, but
I
I did
using their
at some
names is
point have
perfect. Yeah.
yeah, I did explain that. I think maybe I took it out because it just felt clunky, and I don't know
It's
if there's a good way of.
it's gonna feel clunky. It's
Okay.
gonna suck.
Okay.
Um, it's one of those things of, like, ideally you can hide it somewhere.
Hmm.
But it is, and you can hide it at the end of, like, happy birthday, said Sue, drying her hands with soap in the dishcloth. Give me another sentence here about who's Sue, just like one short sentence about,
Okay.
like, Natalie's second mom was standing at the sink, receiving plates as they came from party goers. Like, I just need just a line somewhere to ground who Sue is, because she says this and then you move off of her. And like, oh, that was a weird person over there in the corner that spoke out loud and I don't see again for the next 1,000 words. So just, like, ground her for me, who she is, why she's there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, there's a couple more. So we get Marie and Nat up here. We get Sue. I think there was one more person that I was like, oh, there's another person.
Yeah, Gabriella.
Gabriella. But you ground Gabriella fine. I know where she's coming from.
Okay.
It's really good. Yeah, the party scene here is great. I loved the, like, stepping in the hallway. Again, your writing's very strong. You're giving me a really good emotional journey as we go through. Um, I do how does the magic system work? And by magic system, I mean the, like, reincarnation system. Are
So
they similar? Are they different? Like, how does that work?
Um, okay, so in this world, there's so ghosts and witches exist.
Okay.
Um, if you're a witch, then you can sort of learn to cast spells, but every witch has some kind of innate ability,
Okay.
and that differs from person to person. The reincarnation thing was a spell,
Okay.
so yeah, and it literally transferred, yeah, so Rebecca into this new body.
Gotcha. So I would encourage you to, that helps a lot. You need to get magic into this faster than you're getting it in here.
Yes, this is what I was this is why I was thinking to start it a little later and then add these kind of details of like her thinking about before she
Yeah,
got to the village, like adding those in later.
maybe. Yeah,
I don't know.
you need somebody to,
Really
because
struggle
you have
with
a, so when you
beginning.
said it was reincarnation, it could go one of two ways. It could go what you're talking about, which is a complex magic system where like witches and warlocks and things exist in this world and there's like magical games happening.
Mhm.
That's one way it could go. The other way it could go is that it's like a subtle magic system, like the romance serendipity, where like there's magic exists in the background, but we never really understand it. You're going the former, you got to get magic in here faster.
Yeah.
Right now it reads like the incidental magic. So
Yeah.
I
This
would,
is yeah, this is what I was saying about like trying to apply all of the advice because I was trying to set them up in their normal world, but in their normal world,
you're
there
doing
isn't any
great.
magic as far as they know.
Yeah,
So I'm
you're doing
like,
really
I don't
great.
know how to do it.
A lot of times if you're having a magical thriller like this that's going to start slow, a lot of times you actually pull a scene from the end to the start of the book that ends on a cliffhanger,
Mm,
and then you'll jump back into time.
yeah.
Again, read the books you love, see how they open. They may open that way. But if you're going for this kind of like action magic, almost thriller, like, it's kind of a supernatural thriller, which when you say like horror and supernatural, I immediately go to like supernatural thriller where I'm going to put those together.
Mhm.
If you're going to do that, then you might want to begin at the end, and then that doesn't give us too much information, but just gives us a feeling. Um, and then flashback to this moment. I think about like the Dresden novels kind of fall into that world. Have you ever read any of the Dresden?
No.
Yeah,
I'll
they're
none of
more like
this.
detective pulp than what you're
Mhm.
writing. Um, a lot of times he starts with a fight scene that like is either the end of something that doesn't actually impact the book at all, but it just gives us like emotional pop, or it's like something that we'll come back to later.
Mhm.
But yeah, so sometimes these books will also start with a prologue that like isn't in either of the POV's characters, but just establishes the world building for us.
Okay.
Um, so you
Um,
have lots of options,
yeah,
but
I
you
was
do
thinking,
need to get
yeah,
magic in
you're
here
making me
faster.
think of, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So a lot, yeah, that's just kind of reminded me. So I think sort of the tone wise, so like the sort of creepy horror, supernatural elements, but then like, we've got like the sort of real people going through stuff.
Yeah.
Um, I think I was so CJ Cook's The Nesting and The Lighthouse Witches. I think
Mhm.
those are probably kind of where I was aiming for,
Okay.
if you've read either of those.
I
But yeah,
haven't. How
I'll
do those,
reread.
do you know how they start?
Good question. I'll reread their openings and see what
Yeah.
she's doing with those.
And again, feel free to be like, no, Jeff, you're wrong. CJ Cook starts this way. And you don't know what you're talking about. But, just make the active choice. I'm actually looking it up right now. Um, yeah, no, he starts with CJ. I don't know CJ what CJ's pronouns are. CJ just starts with a uh, yeah, read it and see what you think. CJ starts with a very quick, The Lighthouse Witches starts with a very quick I just read it fast, but definitely starting with Emma. The lighthouse was called Longing, pitched in the midst of the sea. Like it's giving me
Yeah,
this
setting
kind
up
of
the
like,
setting. Yeah.
yeah, hauntingly familiar. It's giving me the setting, but it's giving me the setting with a very strong emotional pull. But
Hmm.
it does that very quickly, right? We're talking 400 words before it's under two. Does that make sense? The four
Mm.
of us scan the bay. It was a raw scene full of moon hiding behind the purple cloud, ocean thrashing against the black cliffs, gulls wheeling and shrieking above us, trees stood like pitchforks in the wind. They hemmed the island watching. So this tone is definitely spooky.
Hmm.
Yeah. Again, this is just a quick read, but the tone here is definitely like, I read this, I'm like, okay, I'm in for something scary. Um, Whereas I read Rebecca and Grandma, and I'm like, I'm in for a sad journey about loss in a diary, right? Like, so we need to get, and again, CJ has 400 words in there before they're pivoting to the next scene. So you can get a 400 word, um, yeah, and then they're going more into the
Hmm.
normal world. Yeah, anyway, sorry, that's a distraction. Read through them and see what kind of emotional pull they're having, and then give yourself, if you're starting, with a flash forward and then a flashback, if you have to, um, that would be good. Yeah. Or you could start with her walking to the pub and feeling something scary, something, outside of herself, some kind of pull. You can craft a 400 word opening for Rebecca. If you want to keep Rebecca in the start, you can craft a 400 word opening for Rebecca where, like, you start with her like walking in the rain, stinging her cheeks, let her pause outside the pub for a moment and feel that, like, you know pulling of the supernatural
Hmm.
in a way that scares her. Like, maybe it's something that she feels in the world or something that she experiences around her that tells her that, like, everything is, that she's not normal, that things are different, that, like, something's calling to her. However you want to phrase that magic system that's going to call out to these characters later, right? Whatever that feeling is, you can put it in the street with her before she goes into the pub, because
Yeah.
times alone are generally good moments of fear. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
That might be another way to go about it. I don't know if that's helpful or not. Now I'm just
Yeah.
throwing
No,
ideas at you.
very.
Yeah. Be proud of your writing, because I'm talking more about speculative ideas than actually like pounding on your dialogue. So know that, like,
Yes.
this is what you left me to talk about. Oh,
I think
so
that
sorry. So
will
going back to my
make
original question,
sense.
because
Yeah.
Nat and Rebecca are the same person, I would recommend finding something in their voices that repeats to give
Hmm.
the reader a subtle hint that this is coming. So here, I don't know if this was on purpose, but they both, um, no, I'm sorry, this is Gal. Is this her eyes flew together? No, yeah, this is Nat. Her
Yeah.
gut clenches. Rebecca's
Mhm.
gut clenches earlier. Again, I
Yeah.
just want you to be strategic about it.
Yeah. So I have them. Yeah. It's body language, I think,
Perfect.
more than anything,
Yeah,
kind of
that's great.
is similar.
Yep.
Like they're both emotionally in very different places. So I felt like how they talk would probably be quite different anyway. Um,
Yeah, well, there are different time periods, right? Like,
yeah.
your use of your free profanity with Natalie definitely represents a transition in how we talk from the 90s to today, right? Like, that's something that has definitely changed in language. Um, so I like using body language. I would almost want you to, like, write down a list of things Rebecca and Natalie do in different emotional moments, so that you're strategic about, like, hey, here's how they respond physically to these moments, so you can
Yeah.
replicate it in chapters. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
And that'll start hinting to the reader, like, hey, these are the same people. We won't get it right away because it's very subtle. If you
Cool.
gave them a verbal tick that lined up, it would be less subtle. Like, oh, that's weird that these two women say the same thing. but if you keep it like in body language, it's more subtle in what you're doing, which I think is gonna, you have a lot of subtlety in your writing, so I think it matches your voice well.
Cool.
Um, there's an interesting moment here where Nat fades off, right? Nat,
Yeah, so what I was trying to do, what I was saying was Marie and Gabriella carry on into the kitchen talking, and Nat just stays behind.
okay,
And she's like, she doesn't really want to go back in there.
gotcha.
But then she kind of makes herself go in and catches the end of the conversation.
Okay, I'm losing the physicality that they're leaving the room.
Okay.
Marie came into the hall.
Right,
I'm
yeah.
checking to make sure if it's me or if you need a little bit more. Gabrielle's face minted into the look of real happiness, and Nap stepped aside, wishing she could melt into the wall. You look cute, Marie said as they embraced warmly. Thanks, Gabrielle said, stepping back and modeling it. Got it for Christmas. How's your dad? Marie asked as they stepped into the kitchen. So it is right there. I just missed it. So ignore me. It's fine. Um,
I think no, I think it maybe does need to just be a bit clearer because I've had someone pull it up before and I worked on it a bit. Yeah, I need to.
You
I
can
think it
just
just
add a
needs to be
couple
a little
words.
clearer.
Yeah, like as they stepped into the kitchen, Nat staying behind in the hallway, let a tense breath
Mhm.
escape her nose. Right. Like part of it too is that you're using this body language, which is good, but you're separating it from her utterance. Right. Like, how's your dad? But he's doing okay. This is an answer to that. You have Nat like disappear here for a moment in the conversation, but it's
Mhm.
not fully clear that she's disappearing. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
either get these two closer together, right? Like he's doing okay, Gabrielle was saying as she walked in, as she followed Marie into the kitchen, not let a tense breath escape her moments. But if you want her coming back, because she comes back here, like, how's the PhD going? Sue asked. Does that make sense? So like they walk into the kitchen, Nat fades out, but then Nat is in the kitchen with Sue, right?
Yeah.
But she does rejoin them. So I might like drop these two together and
Yeah.
then get this rejoined them closer to Sue. Does that make sense? Um, I don't know. Just play with it. I
Mm-hmm.
think yeah, I think if you've heard it from more than just me, I'd just tighten it up a little bit. But I wouldn't add more than a couple words. Like you don't need to block out anything here. You just need like a word or two. I loved her name. Names are hard. Natalie Nightingale is
Yes.
fantastic.
I always just come up with it'll just be like so with men it's usually just what I'd say is like a builder's name like
Yeah,
well
yeah.
just
Chuck. Yeah,
yeah
yeah.
just
Phil.
standard very
Yeah,
standard names and then I'll like have to go back later and like okay I need a different name because they can't all be called like Barry and
I love it. That's hysterical. Yeah. How many bills can you have in your book? Yeah, one. By the way, you can get one. Um, yeah, this was all great. I loved the ending. I like how it wraps for Natalie. I had the last two
Okay.
pages. I had no notes for you. I think it was really good. Um, anything else you want to talk about with the book or with these
Um,
pieces? Anything I didn't hit that you were like, I was really wondering about that?
sorry, just reading my notes. So we've talked about voices. So oh, I guess with Natalie then, do you think I'm setting up am I setting up kind of like the themes? Am I there's not really any kind of magic-y things in that in this first bit, is there?
No, you got to get the magic in
So
earlier. I
yeah,
would say with
yeah.
my feeling with Rebecca is, if you want to know my instinctual take on like what the themes are they're setting up with Rebecca, you set up a very big theme of like trans loss and transition and mourning the past while like trying to move into the future. That's the opening of Rebecca. The
Yeah.
opening of Natalie is like um feeling overwhelmed by life and like not being really satisfied with where she is. But it's not a like lost transition. It's more like this is a little more chaotic, and I don't know how long I can keep going like this. Is kind of how Natalie's comes off.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is good. It's a great emotional start for a journey because you force us into thinking about where's this going? How's this going to change? Um, I do think though, if all of a sudden like somebody had glowing hands, I'd be surprised. Um,
Yeah. I
and you
think
you
so.
you don't have to get it in with this chapter again, like as long as it plays, because we're only 2,000 words in, as long as it plays soon. You got to get magic in fast, though. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think so. Yeah. So how you just described them, that's exactly what I was going for. So
Perfect.
that's
Hey,
good.
you nailed it.
So yeah, I am thinking, yeah, if I have some kind of like teaser start or just adjust Rebecca's bit a bit,
Yeah.
just yeah, at the start, like add those like darker magic kind of elements.
Yeah, you do
That
have
might be the way to do it.
you do have a nice moment. If you give me a sentence grounding me in grandma's apartment, don't change it. Just give me a sentence grounding me there. When she walks outside, if you have a moment outside where it's spooky and she senses something that feels supernatural to the reader, maybe she sees something that shouldn't be there and then she shrugs it off.
Yeah.
That would give me the kind of like ghost story feeling.
Oh,
And then
yeah.
you can
Okay.
jump into the pub. Does that make sense? Because that lets you keep
Yeah.
the opening like you like it with that sense of loss that's really good. I'm gonna say it again, you gotta ground me in grandma's apartment. But once you ground me, having her walk outside to go across the street to the pub, give it when she's alone in the rain, pausing there for a couple paragraphs and making me feel that moment. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, would be good. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually thought that that particular line as well, like I felt like I kind of rushed through that and maybe it needs a bit more in there anyway, so that'd be a really good place to add in because there is yeah, there is a ghost that yeah, there is the ghost that comes in later, so maybe she sees it
Yeah.
then because he kind of turns up when Harry and Constance turn up, so that would actually make sense as well.
Yeah, you have something in this paragraph here that's not fully being developed. I kind of let it go though,
Okay.
because it is a good kind of precursor. I hold my finger over the phrase she uses the sight. I don't remember her ever saying anything like that. I frown and stretch back through my memories and try to identify it there, but there's nothing. The shrill of my so then she gets interrupted. So you have this like, but the problem I think is the sight, you know, yes, that's a commonly used phrase um in supernatural thrillers or like the supernatural kind of genre, but it also could just mean anything, right? Like so
Yeah, yeah,
it's not
yeah,
real. It's
yeah.
a nice kind of precursor, but it's not enough to be like, hey, we're in magic world, right? Like, so here's the moment I'm talking about. She says goodbye. She says she'll be there in 5 minutes. I pull my beanie over the already wind-whipped hair. I hung my coat tight around me and I pace up the road as I enter the pub. So you have her out here in the street. This could be that moment. This moment between I pace up the road and as I enter the pub. You could give
Mhm,
me
yeah.
a moment of supernatural here. You're hitting me with the supernatural and a moment of like fear, like feeling out of place and like confused about what's happening. So
Mhm.
it's a good, this would be a good beat for that. And you're doing it within the first page and a half. So it's a nice, it's getting it in early enough that the reader isn't going to be surprised later into like, oh, wait, we're doing magic things. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really useful. I thought of one more question.
Yeah, go for it.
Um, so each sort of passage is roughly this kind of length. And I do somewhere, as in like, there's about 1,000 words for Rebecca and then 1,000 words for
Yeah.
Natalie. And I do put like maybe two or three passages of each together and then is this a good way of doing it, or should I be staying on them for a bit longer?
there's no answer to that.
There's no answer. Okay, cool. All right, I'll stop
That's
worrying
part
about
of your
it.
author voice. I write
Yeah.
in my chapters, I write my chapters come out to about 1,500 to 2,000 words. And
Okay.
so I have had readers be like, "Man, these are really short chapters." And I'm
Yeah.
always like, "Why do you care? Just read it. What do you care?"
Yeah.
And they're
I
like, "I
always
like it."
feel
Like some
that.
of them are like, "I really like it. It feels like I'm moving through the book really quickly." Some of them are like, "Man, I wish this chapter were longer." And like that has something to do, but I've just come to the place where I'm like, this is my author voice. I write short, tight
Yeah.
chapters. Like they're really so part of this
Yeah.
is
I
just your
mean, I don't even
style.
write chapters, I just write scenes.
Yeah,
And
perfect.
and then I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, so how do I organize this into a chapter?
And maybe
I
you
don't know.
don't. Maybe you just keep it as scenes, right? Like it's
Yeah.
one of those things of like, how do you want to do it?
Mhm.
What's your voice? What's your style here? I will say
Okay.
the only place that I've seen that chapters are important are in audiobooks. So if you make it
Okay.
into an audiobook, because I'm trying to think which book I was listening to lately that clearly did not have chapters, but they forced chapters in because the audiobook
Okay.
structure requires like chapter one, chapter two.
Yeah.
Um, so they didn't say chapter one or two, but on Audible it had like chapter one, chapter two, chapter three, chapter four. And I was like, well, these aren't really chapters. And the author clearly isn't like chapter one, right? Like, but the audiobook structure seemed to demand that. Um,
Mhm.
that being said, I would create your art how you're going to create your art and like don't determine it based on the audiobook structure because you can figure that out later. Um, yeah, so but that, like all that to say, the length of your chapters, how you arrange them, it's about creating a feeling for the reader, right? Like all of this is generating a specific journey for the reader. And
Yeah.
part of that journey is spending time with you as the author.
Mhm.
So just make it authentic to the story you want to create and it'll play great.
Cool. Okay.
All right. Well, let me stop the recording and we can talk a little bit more.